I actually have come to consider myself somewhere on the ace spectrum. I'm definitely not hard
Interesting.
ace or sex repulsed, but I that's a part of me. And yeah, nowadays my sexual relationships move much more slowly. I usually take months and months to have sex with a new partner now.
Okay. Hello, everybody. I am very excited, as always, but extra excited about today's topic. We have an amazing guest with us who I will introduce in a moment. But this has been a long time coming. I've been thinking about wanting to do this topic for a long time. It's something that people reach out to me about, and I think that people just don't know enough about. So we're going to get into all of it today with our guest. So, Katherine Yeagel is a surrogate partner, somatic sex educator, and queer sex and relationship coach. They live in Western Massachusetts on Nonotuck and Pocum. I don't know how to say that.
Pecumtuck?
Thank you, Pecumtuck land. When they're not thinking, talking, and learning about sexual healing, they spend a lot of time in the woods with their dog, practicing fiddle and making challah. So, welcome, Katherine. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. It's so nice to be here, Heather.
Yeah, so Katherine and I know each other. So full disclosure, we have worked together with a client, and so it's really nice though to have this kind of official conversation and just educate you all listening about surrogate partnership. So that's probably my first question, Katherine, is what made you decide to pursue this? You know, it's a kind of unconventional career path, and yeah.
Yeah, that's a great question. At the time, it felt like it was almost on a whim for me. I was going through a really big transition in my life. A lot of crisis happening
Mm-hmm.
in my life, and I was working at a nonprofit, and I was just getting sort of burnt out on nonprofit culture and
Yep.
the 9 to 5 grind. I was getting in trouble. I was going through a lot of trauma in my life, and I was getting in trouble for crying at
Oh
work.
my god.
And I know it was like a 6-person nonprofit. It
Seriously,
was
it's
like a
like
little family.
shaming of emotions. This is why
Totally.
we
And I
have
wasn't the only
issues.
one either. I wasn't the only one. Yeah.
Okay.
So, and I was like really wanting a, a form of work that I could do where I could be my authentic self.
Mhm.
Um, And around this time, as I was going through all this transition, a friend just happened to send me an article about surrogate partner therapy. I think because
Oh.
I was always sort of the I guess like the sex freak in my group of friends would be the easiest way to say
Might as well
it.
just put it out there, yeah.
It's the truth.
Uh-huh.
So people would always like send me things when they saw that, and
Uh-huh.
I had never heard of it, and I was just fascinated. I think that's most people's response when they first hear, because it's it's still such a niche form of therapy at
Oh,
this
yeah.
time, even though I wish it wasn't.
Same.
Um, but most people just don't even know it exists. So when they hear it, they're like, "That's a thing,"
Mhm.
and that was
Mhm.
my response, and I was like blown away and just started researching it really in depth. And a few months later ended up on a call with the person who ran the training program that I ended up doing, and
Hmm.
it was just a whirlwind. Within like 6 months I had done the training and I was launching my career, and I sort of just never looked back. It was a really, really good fit. So
That's amazing.
that's how I landed here.
So, hearing you explain that also made me realize we should probably go a step back and define what is a surrogate
What is
partner?
a surrogate partner? Right.
Yeah.
um mm. so Well, I'll give the brief definition of a surrogate partner, and then maybe I'll talk a little bit about how surrogate partner therapy even came to exist, because I
Perfect.
think that might be
Love it.
clarifying for some folks. So, a surrogate partner is functionally a practice partner for clients who want to learn relationship skills. So, a client has to be already working with a therapist to work with a surrogate partner,
Mhm.
and then they work as a triad.
Mhm.
So, the client does hands on practice with the surrogate partner around all sorts of intimacy skills. So, that involves hands on touch practice, escalating all the way into the erotic.
Mhm.
Lots of stuff around emotional communication, practice with movement, and a lot of work around just boundaries and self regulation. So they're doing all that hands on with their surrogate partner,
Mhm.
and then they're processing everything that comes up with their therapist. So it's a triangular relationship.
And that's what I love about it. I mean, and I remember when we first met and you were kind of explaining some of it to me and like what the process would look like. My initial reaction was just, oh my God, everyone should have had this. You know?
Mhm.
Just sort of
Tell
like
me
this
about it.
really like safe, like emotionally mature, like well thought out, intentional introduction to intimacy and sexuality. And I do think there's a lot of confusion. I'm glad that you explained it the way you did. That, like it's really not just sex.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely not.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, so many. I think I've gotten a lot better over the years at explaining on my website what's involved and talking with clients when I do the intake call to explain because early on I would get so many clients who are like, I just want to learn to give someone an orgasm. I want to be
Mhm.
good in bed,
Mhm.
and it's like, well, those are totally legitimate goals. And
Absolutely.
maybe working on that with a sex worker
Mhm.
or, with a partner is great. But surrogate partner therapy is a very intense form of therapy. It's perhaps one of the most intense modalities of
Yeah.
therapy,
Yeah.
in my opinion, because relationships touch on all of our attachment wounds, all of our old trauma, right? Like, who do we get more activated by than our romantic partners? Like,
100%.
and so, yeah. And so you have to be ready to go into that, right? It's not just like a few sessions, I get the hang of intercourse or oral sex and then
Right.
I'm good to go. It's a really deep, long, intensive process.
It is. And I know also we've had a couple other people either reach out to me and then you or you and then me or something. And a lot of them wind up not being a good fit,
Yeah,
and are
totally.
looking for something that's a little bit different. So who would be a good fit for this more intensive process?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great question because as you said, it's like on one hand everyone could benefit
Oh, I
from
know.
so much of
Yeah.
this work, right? Like
Yeah.
there's a part of me that wishes that, you know, the a bunch of what we learned was just taught in high school sex education classes, right?
100%.
Not the
Yeah.
touch parts, but like learning to self-regulate, learning to name boundaries, learning to receive a no without like taking it as
Mm.
a personal rejection,
Love that one.
right?
Mhm.
There's so many skills that are like just the 101 in surrogate partner therapy that I think we'd all benefit from. But,
Mhm.
I think because the therapy is so intense, most of my clients are folks who tend to be sort of at the end of their rope with like having tried to form romantic relationships or
Mhm.
tried to engage in sexual intimacy and haven't been able to. They have barriers to that. Um, and so this is sort of their last resort of I really, really want to figure this part of myself out. And I'm willing to commit to, a year or a 2 year long journey to learn the skills to do that. Um, so, I mean, there are all sorts of different motivations that bring clients to the work.
Mhm.
I think so. I'll go back to the history a little bit. So, surrogate partner therapy was developed by Masters and Johnson, who are sort of like
Oh,
pop
I never
culturally
knew
famous
that.
therapists. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
In the 60s and 70s, as they were doing all this sex therapy research,
Right.
they basically discovered that, they had all these clients who had, sort of explicit sexual dysfunction,
Mhm.
like erectile dysfunction or vaginismus. They, like they either couldn't have intercourse, they couldn't reach orgasm, and so they were finding that talk therapy could only do so much, and
Mhm.
even like coaching these like coupled clients through um, exercises and approaches could only do so much. They were also getting contacted by a lot of single clients who didn't have a partner to practice the skills
Okay.
with. So they were like, why don't we start training surrogate partners to help clients learn these skills hands on, and we'll oversee the arrangement, not in session.
Mhm.
The therapist is not present
Right.
with the surrogate partner in the client session. I've had clients ask that before. Um, but that, overseeing the process and making sure it's moving at a safe pace and
Mhm.
making sure that the client's able to process anything that's coming up. So, yeah, and then so over the decades, it really expanded, right? I'd say the percent of clients I have who are here for physical sexual dysfunction
Mhm.
is a very small ratio of my caseload these
Interesting.
days. It's much more so. I mean, and this is in part because my passion
Sure.
and like my trauma history that led me to this work,
Mhm.
um, is really around working with clients with trauma.
Mm.
Um, whether that's like abuse or neglect histories, or they experienced a single incident of sexual trauma, or they might not even know what the barrier is, but they freeze or they shut down when confronted with the potential for physical intimacy.
Mhm.
So, um, yeah, that so these days I work with I work with lots of clients who are either like new to coming out as queer and discovering that for the first time, or who've just never had a relationship and just want to learn those skills hands on.
Mhm.
Um,
That part
yeah,
that part makes sense to me, and I think, like, what I learned through our work together is that it's really a full-on relationship, it's all the areas of a relationship that you're doing with your clients, and I think you explained that well, when we work together, whereas, like, when I'm working with clients, I might self-disclose sometimes when I think it's helpful or relevant, but I'm not bringing all areas of myself and my attachment issues or my whatever sexual hangups into
totally.
into the work. But I think, like, what you said about you getting to be like your full authentic self um is so awesome, and I think really makes for such a whole experience for your clients.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it's fulfilling and beautiful and extremely challenging because of all that, right? And that's
Yeah.
why the therapist is so necessary. Is because if I'm doing what a therapist, like you as you named, should be doing, of
Mhm.
like thoughtfully containing their own stuff and only disclosing when it's really beneficial to the client, right? If
Mhm.
I was only doing that, then the client wouldn't be getting the true partnership experience of like
Right.
seeing what happens when their stuff comes up against someone else's stuff, or like
Right.
what is it like if I come and I'm in a bad mood? How does that affect our intimacy, right?
Right.
These are the parts of
Yeah.
partnership. This is what it means to navigate a relationship. And
Right.
so yeah, so I do have to be authentic, but I also have to be just really self-attuned, like monitoring my own regulation
Mhm.
and noticing, and also attuned to the client all the time, right? And so
Mhm.
the therapist is such an essential support in that, because what if I get triggered?
Right.
What if I'm having countertransference? Like what if my own trauma history is coming up in the way that I'm viewing a client, right? That's then my call with the therapist after the session is the opportunity to check in about that, be like,
Right.
I'm noticing this coming up for myself. Or I've even had therapists say, this sounds like it might be some of your stuff is coming up with the client, and we got
Interesting.
to
I mean, I
figure
never
out how to
experienced
hold
that
that.
with you, but yes, you are a human. So, I
Yes. Well, so the client we shared was, not hitting on my personal wounds in the
right.
way that some of my clients have.
And I mean, and just so people know, so, like, basically every time, I would have a session and then Catherine would have a session with our shared client, we would also have a check-in with each other separately without the client. Just, like a 15-minute call or something, but it's a very, like, parallel process, and it's a very, like, synced up process. So I really do think it's like a cool, special, unique thing for people who get to do it. Um,
Yeah. And the
so
talking with a therapist is really one of my favorite parts of my work. I mean, obviously, the one on one work with clients is just the most deeply rich and rewarding.
yeah.
It's what brought me to the work.
Yeah.
But it's been an unexpected delight getting to brainstorm and collaborate with therapists. And, therapists are often working sort of in their own silo as well. And so it can
Mhm.
just be like a really joyful thing that we both get to like be a team to support the client.
Yeah.
I find it really fulfilling. And often, I learn so much from the therapists I work with. And most of the time, the clients that I'm seeing have been working with their therapist for quite a while before I start working with
Okay.
them. And so I get, the therapist is often the source through which I learn a lot about the client, how to
Mhm.
hold them, how to be a support to them.
Mhm. Yeah, it is huge. Um, what are some of the, like, myths and misconceptions you think that are out there about, surrogate partner therapy?
So many. I mean, you named one right off the bat, right? That it's just about sex. And
Right.
even the fact that like the media still calls us sex surrogates all the time is such a classic example of that, right? Which
Yeah.
mystifies me. Um yeah, I think that's a really common myth and misconception. I think the idea that it's easy. Oh, here's a really common misconception I notice in my clients all the time
Okay.
is that you gotta just like rip the band-aid off. You gotta like dive in head first to the work, get to the hard stuff as
Oh.
fast as you can so that you can like get the healing work done.
Okay.
Um, and surrogate partner therapy and the other modality I'm trained in, somatic sex education,
Mhm.
are really rooted in this idea of like starting with what feels good,
Mm.
what works and what's safe, and then slowly expanding
Mhm.
into what's scarier
Mhm.
rather than like diving into the deep end.
Yeah.
Betty Martin, who's a super famous sex educator
Mhm.
and the creator of the Wheel of Consent,
Mhm.
talks about letting yourself be pulled rather than pushing
Oh my God,
yourself
I love
into
that. I
something,
use that with
which I
clients
use
and I
that with all
didn't
my
even know
clients.
that it came from her.
There you go. Maybe you came up with it
I
too.
came up with it separately.
Totally. That happens all the time. So yeah, I like to use the metaphor with my clients of a swimming pool. I think in
Hmm.
old days it used to be really, really common to teach kids to swim by just like throwing them into the deep end of the pool.
Oh yeah.
And it's like, see, sink or swim, see what happens, right?
Good luck,
Well,
kid.
like, yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Best case scenario, the kid learns to swim and had a slightly terrifying event happen to them.
Right, right.
But the worst case scenario is they're like forever terrified of water, right?
Right.
That was like super traumatic.
Yep.
And I think the exact same thing can happen if we try to rush headfirst into the hardest parts of the work.
Mhm.
Um, so I invite my clients rather than like diving into the deep end, why don't we on the first session just like dip our toes in the water, see how the temperature feels. And if it feels okay, then the next session we'll wade a little bit in. And the nice part about waiting is that anytime something's overwhelming or you accidentally get triggered, you just wade back out.
Love that.
Whereas if you're in the deep end, you're just like, ah, flailing. So,
Yeah,
that's something I've noticed. And I don't think that's just a myth about surrogate partner therapy. I think that's a common misconception about therapy and
I
healing
would
in
agree with
general,
that. And I
but
take a similar
particularly.
approach of like, yeah, let's not dive into the most difficult aspect of this without the proper supports and confidence in place.
Totally.
Like
Yeah.
it just doesn't make sense. And I guess probably because we've been doing this work for a while, we know that. But yeah, especially if someone's newer to it, it's like, and I was struck by that when you outlined the process. It's like, first, we're going to help the client get in tune with their own body, and then we're going to help them kind of notice how to communicate that. And then we're going to do the boundaries work. And then we're going to have them notice their own body while also noticing my body. And it's like, okay, this is amazing. And by the end, I feel like they should have like a master's degree in sex or something, or just in,
I do often feel like my clients sort of go out into the world almost as their own surrogate partners. Not
yeah,
that they're like doing healing work on their partners, but they often have this skill set that we're so not taught in our culture. And
yeah.
so they get to go, in a way, be an educator themselves for their future
I think
partners.
so too. And I think that's so cool. And that makes me want to ask you, like, what do you think that we're sort of missing as a culture? Like, where are we just like off
Oh my
the
God,
mark?
where do I start, Heather? Where? Don't get me
This
going.
could be a whole podcast series.
Seriously, you want to
I
like
know.
schedule the next week's one?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I mean, for starters, I mean, whatever perspective you have on the structure of our society and economy,
Mhm.
I think we can all agree that the way our world is structured, we have to often do things that we don't want to do, right?
Yeah.
Like we have to work even when we don't, even on grumpy days when we don't want to, because
Yeah.
we have to have income to survive. I have to go to the grocery store. I have ADHD, and that's like unbelievably overstimulating for me. I hate going to the grocery store,
Uh-huh.
but I have to get food, right? There's
Me
all these
too.
things we're basically coerced to do just to survive,
Mhm.
right? And so I think so many of my clients come in and they don't even know how to find what feels pleasurable or what feels safe
Yeah.
because
That's
they're so
huge.
used to being activated. It's like
Yes.
the absolute first step is like, I use the concept of the green zone, yellow zone, and red zone, which is a
Mhm.
window of tolerance concept. What does it feel like when you're activated? How do you notice that? What does it
Mhm.
feel like when you're like anxious, hypervigilant? What does it feel like when you're dissociated?
Mhm.
And then how do I get into a safe and present and engaged place? What does it feel like to actually be in the green for me? How do I feel that in my body and
Yeah.
notice that that's where I'm at in my mind? Um, so I think that's a skill set we're like severely under resourced in our culture that I often spend the first few months working on with clients.
Right, which again is great for sex, but also its own separate thing too.
Totally. Everyone can benefit from that,
I could
regardless
benefit
of
from
if
that
you're
for sure.
allosexual or asexual. Totally. I
Yeah.
know. I just practicing this with my clients has helped me so much get better
So it's really, I
regulated.
mean, so it really sounds like it's like nervous system regulation is basically what you're saying, right?
Absolutely. 100%.
Which has become a really hot topic. I would actually love for you to say more about that. Like, if
Yeah.
someone listening knows, like, you know what? Yeah, I'm probably in like fight or flight a lot. I know my stress is kind of like too high chronically. It feels hard to calm myself down. Like, where do they even start?
Oh, man. It's really tough. So, one thing I have to talk about with my clients is like, you might not have the choice
Hmm.
to stay in the green zone all the time in the real world
Mm-hmm.
because we have to do all these things to function and survive.
Yeah.
So, our sessions might be unique in your life in terms of providing a space to be in the green zone. So I think for starters, just carving out a space where you do get to be in the green zone. If even if it's just like an hour at the end of your work day where you come
Mm-hmm.
home and you like turn your phone off or something and
Mm-hmm.
whatever your thing is that helps you get green and that helps you feel pleasure and find safety. For me that's baths. I always take like a hot bath
Yes.
or I turn on my favorite playlist. Um but yeah, I mean I think it's different for everyone. And we live in this time where doom scrolling and like binge watching TV is so um there's so much shade around it. People judge
That's
that. So, even
true.
the term doom scrolling is like comes with judgment.
Yeah.
But sometimes like because we've been so on and go 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 all day, we need that like shut down, turn off, zone out
Yeah.
thing to find regulation. So when I'm working with clients who are just consistently in the orange or red throughout their lives, the first thing we'll talk about is like do whatever it is that you need to get in the green at the end of your day. You can like scroll Instagram for a half hour, you can like play video games. Some people it is going to be like the things that we think of as healthier, like
Right.
going on a walk or doing yoga or
Mhm.
journaling, but that's not always the hack for everyone.
It's not, and I appreciate you saying that, and, in my experience, if I'm really activated, if I'm just, like, revved up, like 8, 9, 10 out of 10 with my nervous system, I sometimes need several steps to get down to, like,
Absolutely.
actually relaxed, and one of them is often scrolling on my phone. So, like, I
Totally.
was at Podfest recently in Orlando, and there's, like, 2,000 people there. Overstimulating, had a roommate, did what I did what
Oh
I
my god.
could to, like, take moments for
Ooh,
myself, and I was
yeah.
pretty good about that, but, afterwards, I got myself, like, a nice hotel room. I kinda did, like, a little road trip around Florida after that.
So
It was
lovely.
great, and, but the first hour in the hotel room, instead of, like, going outside or just, like, breathing or reading my book, I was like, "I kinda need to just zone out on my phone." And I did. I
100%.
spent about an hour doing that, and then that brought me down enough to be like, "Okay, now I'm gonna, like, go look at the beach and the water and, like, have a nice meal with
Mm.
my book and really decompress further." But I couldn't have done that right away.
I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's so different for everyone what works. Like for me, anger is, the red zone of the hyper arousal
Mhm.
side of the window of tolerance is that's my default activation
Mhm.
because that's what was going on in my childhood home growing up was a lot of like violent rage.
Okay.
And so that's what I learned, right? And so it's taken me years to figure out, okay, when I'm really revved up, cardio is pretty much the only thing that is going to get me
Yes.
consistently like I need to run. I often like I'll like run. I turn on my like rage playlist. I'm like punching the air as I'm running,
It's like
or a really
Rocky.
hard hike. Right, that's me. Um and then once I've let that out, then I can do more like soothing activities like you
Okay.
said, like just being in nature, like taking a
Yeah.
bath, reading, cuddling my dog.
Yeah. Animals are also amazing.
Ugh,
And people are like
critical
super.
to my
Yeah.
regulation.
I believe all animals are emotional support animals. So I don't know if I should be saying this on my podcast, but anytime my clients would be like, hey, can I have a letter to make? I'm like, absolutely, no questions
It's true.
asked,
They are. They are.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
so. So, okay. So I have another question
Especially
for
in the
you.
COVID era.
Oh, absolutely. Right. That's why there's like no animals left at the shelters.
Totally.
It's like,
We're like, I'm stuck in my house. Let me cuddle this
I
creature.
know. Yeah, there's
Yeah.
amazing research on that. I know there's been some like research with inmates and animals too. So,
Oh, wow.
yeah, some like very good research. So, anyways, if you don't have a pet, get a pet. If you needed permission to scroll on your phone for an hour, you have it now. So hopefully, a few more takeaways than that. But okay, so my question though is like, part of me is like, how do you do this work? Because I would think, like, I would want to be in a relationship with everybody. I'm not gonna be attracted to everybody. So how do you approach that? And kind of like what makes you uniquely suited for that work?
Oh, that's a great question. And I guess I just want to upfront say, like, I think every surrogate partner is going to have a different
Yeah.
answer to this
Mm-hmm.
question. So I definitely am not speaking for the entire
Yeah.
community when I answer this.
Noted.
Um, well, so for me, I will say that okay, I'm not attracted to everyone,
Uh-huh.
but I think I am attracted to a much wider range of people than the average person might be, or much
Okay.
more like open to
Mm-hmm.
in terms of attraction. Um, I am certainly not super attracted to every single one of my clients, although I've had a handful of clients that I'm
Okay.
super attracted to.
Yeah, you're like, oh, this is nice.
This is nice. It's kind of fun. But what I have found over the years of doing this work is that if I'm actively turned off or repulsed by a
Mm-hmm.
client, that is almost always a signal that that client is in some way not expressing their authentic self. That
Wow.
yeah, there's always something there that actually needs to be dug under and worked through. That's
That's
usually like
fascinating
a
to me.
cue.
That's like not an answer I was
Yeah.
expecting. So it sounds like you're attracted to
Mm.
authenticity.
Yeah, I think that is the case for the most part.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, I mean, there I've never had a client come to me who I immediately was like, there's something about this client that I know is a like I'm so unattracted to them I couldn't work with them. I
Okay.
have had clients who've come to me in ways where they're just like immediately crossing boundaries I set and like
Yep.
not respecting what
Yep.
I've stated.
Mhm.
That's a clear no for me.
Okay.
But I've never like said no to a client because I wasn't attracted to them.
Okay.
Um yeah, so I think, I think it does take a certain open-minded type of person or someone who's um I mean, I will say like almost every surrogate partner I know is some form of non-monogamous, right? Most
Mhm.
of us are poly. Um, I think that might not be true across the board, but I think that's true of most of us. But
Mhm.
I do know surrogate partners who struggle with the question of like, I'm never going to be attracted to this client, so how do we make it as authentic of a relationship as
Yeah.
possible? And that isn't something I've struggled with quite as much. But yeah, it's certainly like what makes this work unique, and I think
Yeah.
I think that's every surrogate partner I know that's like been a part of their realization process of
Mhm.
wanting to do this work is like, oh, I could do that. That is something I'm
Mhm.
capable of doing. And so, that is a good indicator that you might be a good fit.
Yeah, I think that part is awesome. And what about the relationship side of it? Like the not sexual part, but just like, is this somebody like I can get along with or, you know?
Yeah, so again for me, usually the only prohibitive thing to working with a client or getting along with a client is if they continue to like repeatedly cross my boundaries
Got it. Okay.
and like not listen to and not like be able to internalize how consent works,
Okay.
which is such a foundational
It
part of
really,
the
really
work.
is.
um but yeah, I've worked, I mean, as you know, I'm a lefty,
Yeah.
and I've worked with clients all across the political
Oh,
spectrum.
that's
I've worked with
cool.
clients of all age. I mean, I'm in my 30s. I started this work in my late 20s. I have worked with clients as young as 21 and as old as 73, I think.
Wow.
I've worked with clients of every race. I've worked with clients of so many different nationalities,
So cool.
um, and every gender. Well, probably not every gender, but
Right.
many
Right.
genders.
Yeah. Um, that is so cool and interesting. So then I'm wondering, like, how has it changed you doing this work?
Oh my God, so many ways. So many ways. So, I mean, I think the most significant shift came several years into the work when I was doing my somatic sex education training,
Mhm.
which that's often where I recommend folks start if you don't have any background in this field and want to get started, is that course I think is a really good introduction.
Okay. We can link to that.
Yeah. It's not perfect. I have plenty of critiques of that program
None of them
too.
are.
No, they sure aren't.
Yeah.
But I do think it does a good job sort of introducing the theory and ethics
Mhm.
of the work, which is so important. And I'd already been a surrogate partner for 3 or 4 years. And as I mentioned at the beginning, right, part of what drew me to this work was being sort of a slut and being like, oh, sex is my thing,
Yeah.
And I was deep, deep into the somatic sex education training in the unit. I was, yeah, in a module where you have to do a lot of self-reflection.
Mm.
And I had sort of a realization, a very hard and challenging realization that my own sexual trauma and what was happening in my household as a kid
Mhm.
was absolutely the root of why I ended up on this path. And
Mm.
that I actually had to heal my own sexual trauma through
Mhm.
doing this. And to some degree, I'd been doing that for years, even before I
I would
became a
think
surrogate
so. Yeah.
partner. But there was a bit of a humbling moment there when I was like, wow, I wonder if I have had unethical moments with my clients because I didn't know what was going on with me or ways that I was
Mm.
triggered or I hadn't fully done my own healing, which have we ever fully
I
done our
know.
own? I mean, it's like life
Yeah.
work. But yeah, I think through doing this work, I have learned so much about my own trauma and my own healing and really done a massive transformation, a huge amount of work on myself when it comes to regulating my nervous system,
Cool.
how I engage in conflict, staying regulated. Like the entire way I've engaged in relationships and sex has shifted, has almost done a 180 since
Really?
I started. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I used to, it's a little embarrassing, but probably until I was about 30, I had never been on a first date that didn't end in sex.
Wow.
Yeah, I was like really fast with
Okay.
sex.
Okay.
And I like couldn't fathom why you wouldn't be.
Right. I
And then during and I think and not to shame
No,
anyone. I
because
know
it's
I have
not the
some
first time
friends
I've
who
heard that. Yeah.
I have lots of friends who like that works for them and is totally healthy and
Mhm.
they're like regulated and grounded and they can have sex on a first date and it's no problem.
Yeah.
But for me, I discovered that actually I was functionally using sex as a drug. It helped me
Mm.
get to ecstatic states in a really immediate way.
Mm.
I was overriding all the signals in my body that were saying, stop, we're freaking out. This is scary. Be careful,
Yeah.
to get to this like positive, good feeling. And so for like 4 or 5 years, I was functionally celibate, took a
Wow.
huge step back from dating, and it felt great. Oh my God, it was amazing.
Wow.
The first few years, it was tough. I was like, almost like, why am I so broken? Why can't I do the things everyone else
Oh.
does? And then there was this profound self acceptance that came where I was like, if I'm asexual and that's where I need to be forever, then that's great.
Wow.
And I actually have come to consider myself somewhere on the ace spectrum. I'm definitely not hard
Interesting.
ace or sex repulsed, but I that's a part of me. And yeah, nowadays my sexual relationships move much more slowly. I usually take months and months to have sex with a new partner nowadays.
Okay. God, that is like a fascinating journey and
Mhm.
transformation. Like you said, it really
Yeah.
does sound like a 180.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really been profound for me. And I think it's certainly not the case for everyone who comes into this field,
Mhm.
but that's I'm far from the only person who's had that experience. I've talked with so many people who at some point in their learning around this stuff
Mhm.
have to just take a really big step back from sex and relationships and sort of reconfigure how they do everything.
Yeah. I mean, and so you were able to do that while still working with your clients though?
Yeah,
Oh
I
my
mean, in
gosh.
fact, working with my clients was a big part of what allowed me to do that because the surrogate partner therapy relationship is so structured and slow,
Right, it
right? We are
is.
never starting any physical activity before we've both really checked in with ourselves and made sure that's like a true yes deep inside me. Like there's no part of me that is scared of that or resistant to that or
Mhm.
doing it because I feel pressured to do it,
Mhm.
right? So actually, it was through my surrogate partner therapy relationships that I think I really learned the skills to do it the way I feel safe doing
Yeah,
it
it sounds
now.
like so healthy, and I think just, like, listening to you, I'm thinking of how many people have made comments to me over the years of like, "Well, I'm just gonna have sex early to, like, get it out of the way so it doesn't become, like, a weird thing." You know?
Yeah, totally.
Or like, "Oh, I'm having lots of sex and I'm worrying, like, is this too much?" Or, I'm feeling guilty, and so I think it's lovely to hear your experience that it's not about, "Oh, this is bad," or "This is, like, slutty in a bad way," or "This is guilt or shame." It's more just, like, really honoring what feels healthy and safe to you and
Totally.
true.
Yeah. And don't get me wrong, I still identify as a huge slut. Like, I go to sex parties. I like am constantly making raunchy jokes with all my friends and loved
Okay.
ones. Like, yeah. But, it's just slutty in a slower, more conscientious way.
How does that work? Explain more about that to me.
I mean, like I definitely have no desire to be monogamous. I'm never going to be
Okay.
with like just one sexual partner.
Yeah.
A lot of my close friendships have been sexual in the past or are sexual or like
Mhm.
flow in and out of that place. Um, you know, I don't often have like one night stands or sort of one off hookups anymore, but there are certainly times that I enter into that space.
Mhm.
That's why I actually don't identify as demisexual, which I think is probably the
Mm.
place most folks would put me on the age
Okay.
spectrum. Because like sometimes I'm down to do like a one time thing, like at
Yeah.
sex parties,
Yeah.
like that's a fun thing for me. Or
Yeah.
when I'm traveling and I get that like spark of like I'm just open to the world,
Yeah.
sometimes that
Yep.
happens for me.
Mhm.
So
I get that. I've talked about Vacation Heather on the show, and she's just a great time.
I can see that.
Yeah.
That checks out.
Thank you. But yeah, I don't know. I love that combination that you're describing of like being able to be really present and slow and intentional. And I've also had that experience where I've been on a date early on and it seems quick, but I've like really checked in with myself and my body and it's been a clear yes. Um, and it's kind of like, okay, that's great, And it was actually very cool. I remember like a certain experience where the other person was like, I love that you're doing that. I was like, oh my God, that makes it like more of a yes.
Doing that pause to check
Yeah.
in with yourself. Oh,
Yeah.
I love that. You like actually like took a moment
Yeah.
on the date and were
Yeah.
like, I'm gonna
I was
just
like,
oh, that's beautiful.
thank you.
Can't we all model that?
Well, hopefully someone listening will get something out of this.
Yeah, truly. I mean, that right there is like if a client I worked with that was the only thing they took away, I would pat myself on the back, right? If they like
That's
paused before
awesome.
they decided. That's such a skill and so hard to do in the moment when you're feeling horny and there's now
Yeah.
that motivation and
Yeah.
someone's expecting that of you
Yeah.
and
And I think for me it kind of came from having experiences where maybe I had sex and then regretted it later and like really reflecting on did I kind of bulldoze through a signal that was there. I know I have a part of me that is a bulldozer, so it was kind of just making sure that it's like that bulldozer part wasn't running the show and I was like truly honoring what was there. And then I think that really did help me not have regret after sex or feel like I had kind of harmed myself in some way.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have been there. I bet many of us have been
But,
there.
like, what would our culture be like if everybody was, like, checking in with their body? And, like, what should
I like truly can't even imagine.
like,
I mean, is it even
radical.
possible in this world?
Yes, it
I
is.
mean, I
We're
think
gonna do it.
oh, I love your idealism. You know what? I need to internalize some of that. Yeah, I mean, it would be such a profound shift if we were all right. I mean, so there's so much of what I do, especially as you named in the early stage and like the foundational stage of
Mhm,
surrogate partner therapy. The first stage is that self regulation piece of
mhm.
checking in. Then the next piece is, as you mentioned, staying attuned to yourself while bringing your partner's desires and requests back in, right? And that part, that's a whole other question for how our culture would shift, right? Is
Yeah.
like, can we receive someone else's boundaries with respect and like, I mean, how how often do I hear or see in the world someone like calls in sick and then their boss gives them a bunch of shit for it or guilts them, or someone got a letter for like
Yeah.
calling in sick too many times? It's like, that's my physical body's boundary. Like, I
Yes.
am ill. I
Yes.
cannot come in.
Yes.
And here someone is like, shame on you for having a boundary.
Absolutely. And even I see this on there's so many issues where to begin, but I was watching some show and a kid was like, "Can I go to the bathroom?" And the teacher was like, "No." And I was like,
Totally.
"Sure,
Oh my
maybe
God.
kids lie sometimes, but like
Right.
what are
I
we
mean, of course, but
teaching
like,
people?"
we're starting from that place.
I know.
Classrooms, I feel like, are such a potential site of relearning
Mhm.
consent and boundaries.
Mhm.
There's one of this video I watched, it was probably like a decade ago that this video went viral, that where a teacher had like a poster outside her like classroom door
Mhm.
that had options for what kind of greeting the kids wanted
Oh,
to do
it's
with the
so
teacher when they
cute.
came in. So they would like line up outside the classroom door, and then the teacher would stand there and the kid would point at which one they want to do. It would be, so you could get a high five,
Uh-huh.
you could get a hug, you could get a handshake, you could just say hi, or you could get nothing, I think
Okay.
was what the options were.
Okay.
And they would choose each one and they would get it. And I was like, what a beautiful, I like remember crying when I saw that video. Cause like, imagine if we were all taught that we have that autonomy over our bodies, It's not like, can I go to the bathroom? No. It's like,
Right.
what's actually best for you in this moment? What an empowering experience.
That is very cool, and you're right. I mean, sometimes, I have friends with younger kids, and I hear about, like, social emotional learning that they're doing. Definitely not all of the schools, but sometimes
Oof,
I'm hearing
yeah.
about this, and I'm like, "Wow," like, and I recently visited my brother and his kids, and, of course, I'm gonna be like the aunt who teaches consent to the
Yes,
two-year-old.
yes.
Which they're good about too, but I'm like, "Okay, ask first," you know? Yeah,
Totally.
so it's pretty funny, but yeah, it is important to learn that, and I do just think, like, what if people gave themselves permission to slow things down when they were being sexual with someone, or to do that pause and check in with their own body, and to communicate that, and to me, it's just like, I get excited about the possibilities, like, the possibilities of co-creating, basically, and, like, when people are being so authentic, um, and I love that you said you were kind of, like, attracted to authenticity, basically. I think a lot of people are. It's like, what if we changed the script and it was like, this is gonna make me more attractive?
Absolutely. I mean, studies have shown again and again confidence is the most attractive feature in a
Mhm.
potential partner, right?
Mhm.
And, I think so. A lot of us, I think there's often this takeaway of like, I've got to put on this mask of confidence,
Yeah.
I got to like act confident, which, there's value. Don't get me wrong. There's value to like fake it till you make it,
Yes.
for sure. But what I have discovered is like most supportive to my clients most of the time, and definitely for myself as well, is like, how do I find that like most true purest expression of myself and
Mhm.
like bring that out? And that's where you find like true genuine confidence from, is when I like really feel empowered and joyful expressing my like most real internal self.
Yeah. Yeah. And I wanna tell people, like, it might take a while to find that,
Totally.
There might be sort of layers of, like, masking that you've done, and, I talk about parts a lot. There might be different parts that are kinda running the show instead of, your highest self, and, that's possible to work through. Um,
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I view it as as a life journey in a way, is to like kind of
it
like
is.
peel off all the additional layers of BS and
Yeah.
get down to the real essence.
Right, and I mean, yeah, it's cool hearing your journey and even reflecting on mine. It's like we've clearly worked through some things, and I don't think either of us is close to done,
No.
you know?
Which I think can sound so overwhelming for folks when they're just starting or they're
Maybe.
thinking about starting doing the healing work. But what I've found is there's actually a lot of relief to that.
Yeah.
it's like I don't have to get it all done. I'm never
Correct.
going to be perfect.
Correct.
Perfect is actually a really toxic concept, right? One of the principles of white
It is.
supremacy from that famous essay.
It is. And also it's the enemy of intimacy. Like to me, like
Ugh,
intimacy is a little messy. Like if we were robots,
absolutely.
there would be no intimacy.
Ugh, I know. The like over hygienized, is that a word? The very hygienic,
Yeah.
like perfect crisp version of sex that we
Yeah.
can.
Like,
Yeah,
ew,
that's
that doesn't
sex is
sound fun.
messy. It's literally fluids. Like, what are you it's
I think
messy.
when you say it that way, like it's literally
Yeah.
fluids, it's like, yeah, like realize that. Take it in. It's not going to
It's
be this
bodies
like
on
color
bodies.
by number, like follow steps 1, 2, and 3 in order type
Mm.
of thing. So the
Yeah.
sooner we let go of that, I think the more fun we're going to have and the more sort of like surprise and delight and connection and creation.
Absolutely. Yeah, I cannot tell you how many clients I come in and that I so much of what we're doing is sort of deconstructing
Yeah.
the like script or like
Yep.
baseball bases model of
Uh-huh.
sex, right?
Uh-huh.
That's what I remember that when I was a kid. That was what we were like, oh, did you get
That
to second base? So
yes.
it's like that's especially now that I've been queer, I was out as queer for so many years. It's like that, things that I used to think of as like foreplay. It's like that's just sex.
Thank
Like just
you.
have like whatever you need to do,
Yeah.
whatever works for you.
Right.
I mean, how many people's confidence and sex lives are just destroyed by the pressure to have P and V sex, so they don't even want that,
Absolutely.
right? Like so many women can't even orgasm from P and V sex. And here
Right.
men are thinking that they have to give that to their partners when most of the time it'd be great to just get some fingering and some
Yes.
oral sex,
Right.
and it's
Bring a
like
toy in
that.
there. Yeah.
Totally. Oh my God. And how many men feel insecure about their partners having toys? How many women feel insecure about their partners watching porn? Like these can
Yeah.
all be additions to sex,
Correct.
not,
Correct.
not reducing the joy of it. So, yeah, moving away from this idea of like, here's the structured steps
Right.
way to do sex
Right.
and like what feels good in my body in this moment. There's a flow to it.
Yeah.
How do I be with myself and be with my partner and follow what feels good?
Yeah. Oh my God. I love it. Okay. So on that amazing note, if people are kind of like, okay, I'm so fascinated about this surrogate partner stuff, or like Katherine just seems like an awesome human, how do they find you?
Okay, I mean, there's my website,
Mhm.
KatherineYeagel.com,
We'll link to this.
Kathe. Great, perfect. I don't have to spell it.
Mhm.
I'm on social media. I'm on Instagram. I also I'm on Facebook. Like you could find me there, but I rarely check it.
Okay.
Um, but yeah, I mean, probably email is the best way to contact me, and you can do that through my website.
Okay.
Um, yeah, I'm involved with the Surrogate Partner Collective. Probably going to be
We
taking
can
on a
link
more
to that.
structured role there
Oh,
soon. But
really?
yeah, I've been thinking about it for a while.
Cool.
So I do presentations for their training sometimes. I love doing presentations for classes of therapists, so that's a way
Oh,
you might see me
cool. Okay.
sometimes. Yeah.
All right. Well, Katherine is awesome. So please do reach out to them and and maybe you'll work with both of us then.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that'd be a
it's
blast.
fun. But yeah, thank you so much for being here. I just think this is such an important topic and I appreciate you just kind of giving us the real deal on
It was so fun. This was a blast.
it. It
I'd
was
love to do it
fun.
again
All
sometime.
right. Might be another round. Okay, everybody. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you, Katherine, for being here, and we will catch you next week. Bye. Thank you for listening to the Ask a Sex Therapist podcast. Got a question about spicing things up in the bedroom? Find the answers you're looking for in my Dirty Talk Guide, a free resource for my podcast listeners. Grab yours now at heathershannon.co/dirty talk. Again, that's heathershannon.co/dirty talk. And be sure to tell your partner or friends because everyone has something they would like to ask a sex therapist.